and welcome from Global Young Academy. We are very happy to have you on the board on this session regarding trust in food science. So we are going to discuss about what really is transforming of food systems regarding public trust, regarding engagement to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much now for the first minutes, and I would like now to share the screen. I don't know if you can see the screen.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so thank you for joining us to this session of Global Young Academy in transforming food systems regarding public trust and engagement to reach UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we are going to be the moderator. So my name is Anet Režek Jambrak, coming from University of Zagreb, Faculty of Food Technology and Biotechnology, from the Laboratory for Sustainable Development, and Dr. Shalini, Arya, from Faculty Institute of Chemical Technology from India, and Shalini is Executive Committee, a member from Global Young Academy. I would like to introduce our panelists. So I would like to welcome Carina Keskitalo. Carina is professor teaching in political science at the Department of Geography from Sweden. Carina is alumni from Global Young Academy, and Carina was a member of a group of chief science advisors from the European Commission. Also, Carina is going to speak today based on advice on food that was developed by the group of chief science advisors from the European Commission. Welcome, Carina. Then coming up to our next panelist, Chibuike Udenigwe, our new member of Global Young Academy. Chibuike is a professor from University of Ottawa, from Canada. And Professor Chibuike has a great track record regarding publishing papers and books. So welcome Chibuike to Global Young Academy and to this panel. And also I would like to welcome Professor Hugo de Vries. We have a pleasure of welcoming President of European Federation of Food Science and Technology. Professor Hugo is working in INRAE as scientific director of the team Food, Nutrition and Bioeconomy. And Professor Hugo also has a great track record in different kind of projects, and Professor Hugo obtained a PhD in physics and held several positions around the globe. So thank you very much for now. This is for the introduction. And now I would like to invite Shalini to introduce our session.
Thank you so much, Anet, for a kind introduction. So once again, good afternoon, namaskar, namaste, boa tarde, guten nachmittag. Honorable guests, esteemed speakers, scientists, faculties across the different continents, my dear friends and colleagues from Global Young Academy, a very, very warm welcome to one and all in this most exciting session of the day, that is transforming food systems, public trust and engagement to reach UN's SDGs. Well, my dear friends, you all know very well that food is one of the most important things. Food unites us. Food nourishes us. It keeps us alive. Can you imagine the life without food? We will die hungry. So, but at the same time, looking at its production, marketing, there are various global issues such as local climates, biodiversity, cultural practices, differences in the economies, traditions, and etc., which affects adversely. And you all know that this COVID-19 pandemic has badly affected, and food systems are also in one way have affected. So while you know that the local conditions offer a very important and untapped potential for alternative solutions to combating the food shortages and also working towards more sustainable production and consumption, globalized aspects of food system need to become more sustainable and more inclusive. And you all know that in 2021, United Nations Secretary General will convene a food system summit with the aim to rethink and transform this global production and consumption of food in a way that collaboratively we can work towards achieving these UN SDGs. And we, the experts in the area, along with the Global Young Academy, has initiated a project on this topic, and which is preparing a policy brief for the Food System Summit from the collective perspective of expertise among early career researchers from different countries and from different disciplines. At the same time, today's Global Young Academy's panel sessions or these speakers aims to gather a diverse perspective from science and industry. Also, we would like to, know the sustainable solutions to the future of food systems and cross-cutting view to many of the SDGs, including number 2, zero hunger, number 3, good health and well-being, 10, reduced inequalities, 12, responsible production and consumption, and 13, climate actions. So further, we would also like to discuss how can we increase the public trust and understanding and engagement in a common efforts to shift towards the sustainable food production and consumption. And it is within this context, Global Young Academy is very proud to bring to you, to present to you, transforming food systems, public trust and engagement to reach the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure we will be able to create a very strong discourse around this very topic and bring a lot of new ideas that will support this very good cause. So in today's session, we will have a question answer session at the end of all the talks. So if you have any questions, just type your question in the live chat box. And if you miss anything, don't worry, we will be making these recordings available post this session on our YouTube channel of Global Young Academy. So with this, I welcome all of you once again for this very exciting and at the same time most important session of the day. I now request Professor Anet, Faculty of Food Technology and Biotechnology, University of Zagreb, to take this session further. And thank you so much, and platform is yours.
Thank you, Shalini, for introduction of our session. And thank you all for joining us, and thank to our panelists for their time to join us on this really important topic regarding transforming food systems and really the trust. How can we transform the food system to reach UN Sustainable Development Goals? So to start our session, I would like to ask Carina to share with us the European Committee Group Advisor opinion. So what is the situation regarding sustainability in food systems? So please, Carina, if you can talk to us and discuss about what is the opinion.
Thank you so much. I'll try to share my screen.
Okay.
Okay, hopefully now you see the pictures in full screen. Okay, this seems to work. This is excellent. That's the first step. Okay, so I'll talk. I'm actually a previous member of the group of Chief Scientific Advisors. I was sat for almost 5 years, and I was recommended by the Global Young Academy quite some time ago then. And as you've heard, I'm a Global Young Academy alumni. And actually only 2 weeks ago, I stopped being a member of the group, and I had set the terms that were allowed. But I will talk about an opinion, as it's called. I'll talk a bit more about this lingo of what this group works with soon. But I was lead member on an opinion on towards, with the title Towards a Sustainable Food System. And to know then what we actually worked with, I will now show you a very complex little graph that people at the Commission have developed. So the idea is that we actually work directly for commissioners, and you do see when I point on the screen, right? Yeah. So we do actually provide advice directly to commissioners or the Commission on what is seen here as societal challenges, policy priorities, basically issues that are interesting for legislation and policy development. So this group, which is 7 people, which obviously can't cover all disciplines, but at least a large spread. The idea is to have as large diversity as possible in terms of countries, also both younger and very senior researchers, all disciplines, or the spread of disciplines. Obviously, you can't cover all with only 7 people, but from the humanities and social sciences to technologies, natural sciences, medical sciences, as much as possible, or as broadly as possible. So the idea is then that this group will be able to discuss with Commission staff on what are the questions that can be posed on any specific policy challenge, so as to allow it to be researchable. We then define a scoping paper, which is then the basis for that the group take on the question, and most usually then go to a consortium of all the existing European academies, or the large academy networks in Europe who have joined together in something called SAPEA. And they then usually develop the scientific advice as an evidence review report, which is then provided to the group of chief scientific advisors, who then have expert hearings, stakeholder meetings, and develop an opinion, which is then delivered to the Commission, which then hopefully, as is the idea on this slide anyway, will lead to better policymaking and legislation. And at least for this opinion that I'll talk about today, it has to some extent supported the farm to fork strategy. And previous work, we've also worked on a number of different opinions. So we also done previous work on food from the oceans, and related this type work. So that's how it is set up. And this specific scoping paper then, or the study, was asked to focus on what are the workable paths to deliver an inclusive, just and timely transition to an EU sustainable food system. So that's the question we finally agreed on, and with a specific angle as well, because we could see that most of the advice that did exist or does exist on the food system is actually more natural science based. So this is actually a social science based study that discusses the how, if you so wish. I mean, natural sciences may often discuss the what needs to be done, and the social sciences one may see it as, to more of an extent, discuss the how can we do this? How can we work with people, maybe even with issues such as trust, even if that was not a major focus here. How can you communicate on issues? How can you actually develop policy? In what areas? These type questions. So that was the idea for the study. And of course, as I already mentioned in this complex graph, this was developed in a number of ways. First, we had a scoping review, looking at how can we define the question. We then defined this specific question in a scoping paper. We had meetings with responsible policy directorates generals, or DGs. SAPEA developed a systematic literature review, which you can also easily find online if you wish. It's over 100 pages, very extensive. Or a review report, and they also had a literature review. Both of these can be found online. So actually a lot of documentation went into this, which is the idea that it should build on best available scientific advice from all relevant sciences. And then we had this expert elicitation and stakeholder meetings, then often stakeholder meetings to figure out, is this workable, in what scope of time, these type issues. So that's the type of work that goes into these type of opinions. And what could we then say? Well, obviously our opinion is also not enormously short, maybe it's 50 pages or so, but just to summarize, what they usually do is that they provide also brief recommendations that sort of crystallize the main advice. And a lot of this was then crystallized in only one sort of zero recommendation, a very overarching one, and then 3 recommendations with a number of sub-recommendations. And I'll just go through very briefly the main recommendations and some of the examples from sub-recommendations here because of limited time, but all of this is available online. So the main areas, and I think these actually speak a lot to what we are talking about today, is then to not see food only or mainly as a commodity. It's connected to culture, it's connected to supplying essential needs. One has to consider these type of things and not just, economic commodity thinking. And one then has to really, in a cohesive way, look through how can environmental, social, and economic sustainability together be made a central objective of all policies relevant to food, and how can we actually integrate food in a real life manner where it's not only a commodity, but where you have to think about a number of issues that make food achievable and possible for people to get, and for food to be nutritious, because a lot of food that is produced today is not nutritious, and also a lot of food that is produced today is wasted. So there's a number of issues one has to think about. And to do this then, we have a number of recommendations under this point 1, ensure a truly integrated approach to bring about a sustainable food system. Many of these include mainstreaming of policies to really look at, because food policy is not only about food, it's also about energy, it's about water and ocean sectors, which are, you seldom actually really consider where do we get our minerals? Should we get them from the ocean, or should we get them from agriculture? From what produce? But this is something that would have to maybe be developed and mainstreamed with policy changes. But policy from above also can't do everything. It would also have to look at what is doable in different regions and cities and megacities and different areas. And for that reason, we also had a recommendation on the need to stimulate diversity. Really look at what are the local pilots. There's lots of different initiatives, and the Sapir report took several examples of how there are, food initiatives, and it can be anything from food sharing to different tax systems, to a number of these things that are, examples that can be taken up in different areas. Some can be upscaled, some maybe can't. And different countries and regions just work differently and have to see how they can live with sustainable foods in the way that is possible for them. Yeah, and then, and this was actually a recommendation, the second one that we got a lot of positive, very much, I think, positive feedback on, because we actually treated the issue of power, which people noted that much scientific advice actually doesn't. But of course, advice built on social sciences would have to. We noted that, for instance, and the Sapir report, which we built on, noted that much of food policy is actually focused on producers and consumers. But today, maybe the most powerful actors are really retailers, the large retail networks, the sort of these mega actors. And maybe one has to then look more there. And then think about how can we support a food environment that helps citizens to make healthy, sustainable food choices. We all know that we maybe not always buy what is good for us. We may buy a pizza because we feel like it. We don't think about what is nutritious first, maybe. And for that reason, one has to think about lots of things, including how can we make the more nutritious food maybe cheaper? How can we communicate this? And how can we then, through price signals, for instance, make people or support people in making choices? So it shouldn't be that the citizen have to think for themselves all the time, because they act in a context which is not only about health, it's also about, culture and what foods you have to have for specific holidays or what is valued for a usual weekend. So it's more about, how do we then price signal foods and also increase the policy focus on, for instance, retailers, not just saying the citizens should act or the producers should act. There's lots of other actors as well. And then as a final one then, drawing also from this angle, a lot of food policy and maybe lots of policy in general has actually dealt with that, we can do lots of things voluntarily. We can work on voluntary certification and standard systems, which are market-based. But lots of research on this actually shows that one has to go further. It's not the only drive or the only policies that should exist. They should maybe be supplementary rather than main, and one has to look also at the full range of measures: regulatory, financial, behavioral, communication, education, all of the above. So I think that has more than maybe filled my allotted time. So I will thank you there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carina, for introduction on these sustainable food systems and opinion from European Commission. And now we can move forward to Professor Chibuike. So I would like to ask Professor Chibuike and afterward Professor Hugo regarding the current situation of food systems in reaching sustainable development goals. And are those food systems now sustainable? And when the food systems are evolving sustainable, or are they unsustainable? So please, Professor Chibuike.
Okay, thank you, Professor Jambrak. And once again, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present my perspective. And also use this opportunity to also thank the GYA for very kindly inviting me to join the membership of this excellent group of young researchers, early career researchers. I would be speaking today from a perspective of a food scientist, okay? Especially related to the Sustainable Development Goal 2, which is a zero hunger goal, but also as earlier mentioned, as well as how it's interfaced with the other Sustainable Development Goals that are geared towards promoting the food systems, especially in making it more sustainable than it is currently. So I would like to reiterate on the role of the food researcher, especially in working in concert with other disciplines. As already mentioned this morning, there is a need to avoid working in silos and converging instead by looking at the interactions of the different disciplines and sectors in considering the various dimensions of the food systems if we want to be impactful, if we want to make positive impact, and at the same time try to use that opportunity to gain the trust of public in sharing a common stance on the topic. And this is very much like the modus operandi of the GYA, as I have come to see, where people from different disciplines work together towards achieving a common goal. So that said, I would like to now outline a few ideas or things that I've seen as things that may be relevant in addressing this issue of food sustainability, especially with respect to the UN SDGs. So the first is that I believe that scientists are already working with the food industry and producers. This is very important because it actually tries to drive practical food innovations, so in addressing some of the common challenges faced in the industry. And there's also a very well-established science policy initiative at the global level, for instance, the high-level panel of experts. These are all already existing very promising initiatives that are geared towards a more sustainable food system, especially in tapping the scientific expertise of people from around the world, and also to some extent of the other stakeholders like the industry and the consumers, the public. But I also believe that a bottom-to-top approach is also important in policymaking, and this should be highlighted more. And this particularly would facilitate engagement at the community level, because when you consult people, it makes them feel connected with the system, all right? And that contributes in building trust. So I believe that in addition to the high levels panels, there should be also initiatives led from the grassroots that could also complement already existing efforts in addressing some of these needs. In general, interaction between the scientist and the consumer needs to be enhanced. It could be better than it is currently. And this can take the form of routine engagement between the food scientist or food researcher and the public during public debates as this. And this can be done at all levels, from the global level to the regional and country and community levels. And this is very important because it provides an opportunity for the scientists to listen, but also to share scientific facts with the public, all right? Especially now that there is an increasing cases of misinformation propagated by the media, especially highlighting the failures of science without proper context. And in order to provide this proper context and to also show the power of science in addressing some of these needs, the scientists need to step away from the lab sometimes and engage with the public in order to provide this correct information that would help to build public trust in science. So the second point is about food science and technology as an applied discipline. Over the years, over centuries, have contributed in solving many practical issues. Issues like food preservation or enhanced nutritional properties of food or conservation of nutrients in food, food safety issues. So all these are excellent examples of how food science and technology has contributed in addressing some challenges over the years. But additional approaches are needed to complement these existing food innovations in making food systems more sustainable. And I'll share some examples. For instance, one case is about food diversity. This is a largely untapped resource because if you look around different countries, you see that there is abundance of nutrient-dense indigenous foods or traditional foods. Sometimes you see neglected and underutilized crops that are no longer used in the food systems. And the revisiting of these untapped resources, we reduce the over-reliance on the currently limited selection of foods that we have, and also encourage local production of food, which would indirectly then lead to reduced needs to transport food over long distances, and maybe also reduce food waste at different levels of the society and of the food value chain. Right. So if you look at this, it connects very well with another sustainable development goal, goal 13, which is related to environmental sustainability in terms of climate action. And see how these two goals are well fitted in addressing food system issues. The second one is about food for health. Most of the efforts in the past have focused on increased yield, which is very important, agricultural production. But then a very limited information is available to the public about how they can use food to derive health benefits, especially with emphasis on diseases that are diet related, or health issues that are diet related, like overnutrition, and related issues like obesity and diabetes. And if you look at it more critically, you see that it has a very big connection with SDG Goal 3, which is about good health and well-being. And then there could be interconnection between the two disciplines, the health and the food discipline, in order to address some of these challenges and gaps in the food system. And then I'll give a third example, and that is related to circular agri-food system, because this is now an ongoing topic about upcycling and value-added processing of waste products, so food waste and byproducts. And this is an excellent way of recycling nutrients back into the system and reducing the waste, which has contributed immensely negatively to some of the challenges we have in the food system. So these are only a few examples of sustainable food innovations that would strengthen the food system. And they're not complicated, really, but challenges are expected, if you want to implement such initiatives, as they may require the public or people or consumers to unlearn, years of practices. For instance, as you know, food is an integral part of human culture, and we're all born with a particular food preferences or culture. And then when that culture or system is not sustainable, and then we're now trying to ask people to change what they really know over a long period of time and adopt something new, you can see how challenging that would be. But I believe that if you bring this question and challenge and make it clearer to the public and the consumer, and then they begin to see how they are stakeholders within the system, and then perhaps that would also help in creating that awareness of the challenges that need to be tackled, and how that consumer could also participate in tackling those challenges. So that brings me to the next point about the citizen science. And I believe this is needed for inclusive data gathering, and also preferring some creative solutions to problems that we have within the food systems. So I believe this is one of the biggest areas that has not been tapped in our current, has not been tapped enough in our current efforts to create a better food system. There are some examples. For instance, there are the scientific literature on the best practices, evidence-based scientific discoveries that could help influence policymaking positively. But there's also the widespread use of indigenous technologies that are not documented in the scientific literature, or indigenous innovations that are not documented in the scientific literature that could be tapped into in bringing some creative solutions, like I'd mentioned earlier, to some of these questions. For example, in sustainable processing, there are local methods that could be used to sustainably process food while retaining the nutrients and enhancing the nutritional benefit of the food, and then reducing over-reliance on the environment, to achieve these goals. I believe that if we invest more in citizen science, and that would increase public appreciation for the work of a scientist. And also increase awareness on issues like food waste at the consumer level, which, if you put it together, it would help build public trust in science. Now, since we're talking about the future, then it's very important. The future food system is very important to integrate food systems education early in the curriculum, especially in schools. And with that, you can start in the early phases to engage young citizens, and then also help popularize food-related studies and careers. So that way, if they learn these things early in their lives, then by the time they grow and become adults, then there wouldn't be an issue of distrust, because this is already integrated into their lifestyle, and it's already integrated into their experiences. And then with that, we'll be able to reduce some of these issues in terms of the mistrust that you have in the public for science. So finally, I believe that transparency is also important, especially in communicating scientific results. I say this because as scientists, we are always ambitious and excited, especially to share data from our perspective. But then sometimes we fail to clearly explain to the public that the science is powerful. Of course, there is a power of science, but also there is limits of science. And I say this particularly because failing to explain the limits of the science now leads to a case where you have one discovery this year, and then 10 years later you have a contradictory discovery. And when you have such scenarios, it brings about some sort of distrust, especially from the public, when you cannot sustain some of these engagements and discussions. So it's important to communicate that clearly, showing that while we can there are limits, just because we have particular provisions in science, and hopefully, with advancement in technology, we'll be able to more clearly understand some of these circumstances in order to prefer better solutions to the issues we face in the food systems. So I will stop from here, and looking forward to the discussion coming afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chibuike, for a very nice, very nice talk regarding current situation in food sustainability and food systems. So regarding sustainability in food systems, we are discussing about the impact, what really sustainability is, impact to the society, impact to the environment, and impact to the economy. So I would like to ask Professor Hugo, as a president of European Food Federation of Food Science and Technology, and as a professor from INRAE. So in your opinion, what is the current situation regarding the sustainability and food systems? And are our current actions and missions having sustainable development goals in mind, are those programs and missions really sufficiently well defined? That we can really reach and transform our food systems to be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anet, and thank you also very much to all the other organizers and to the Global Young Academy as a whole, with all the participants. I cannot answer the question of Anet, so I can stop now, or I can give at least some contributions that may help you in your thinking and in your pathways to your futures. I hope that it will help a little bit. I try to go back to my time as a young scientist, but then today. And then I'm going to ask myself a lot of questions. And I try to go through them, and then with that, hopefully give some elements to the questions that Anet has just addressed, which is far from easy. But let's give it a try. If I'm you, then you have a burden on your shoulders that is immense. Because what we realize today, and Shalini already expressed it in our introduction, we have really severe challenges in front of us. Those are big, big waves, and how to overcome them. And it is maybe elucidated in so many presentations, in so many studies and publications, in reports of the UN, of the European Commission, and so on, then I'm nearly becoming afraid. So what to do, and what to do with all this information, and what to realize that I am, as an individual, I'm a small colibri. So whatever I do, my contribution will be minor, even though a lot of minor contributions can make a big difference. So don't give up, that is for sure. And even what we know in very complex systems, the butterfly effects, just one butterfly can destabilize a system, but also can re-stabilize a system, going back to a sustainable environment. So whatever you're going to do, it will be appreciated, at least if you have the good intentions. Now, then the other question that was posed, but how will it be trustful? That is also an extremely difficult question. So also I like to come back to this question at the end of my talk. The first question that I'm going to ask myself, why do we need to redirect our current food chain thinking? Because we think still a lot in change, in food chains, in the dairy chains, in the meat chains, and so on. Why do we need to redirect it to food systems? That is already a key question. And then the second question is, but okay, we say we are needing to go to sustainable food systems, but what are sustainable food systems? If we are responding to the goals defined by the UN, the Sustainability Development Goals, or to the ambition stated by the European Commission in the Farm to Fork strategy. For example, there is stated that we need to have 25% of our farmland organic. But does that mean that our systems are then sustainable? And how do we know that? And what kind of indicators do we have to see that it is sustainable? The ambitions are fantastic. I'm not be against them, but I'm only posing the question, how can we be sure that they are then leading to sustainable outcomes? So the first question always comes back, but what are sustainable food systems? Therefore, I like to work a little bit on your imagination. Suppose, and that is what I've learned as a physicist, if I look to all the figures today, if we look to climate change, or if we look to biodiversity loss, or if we look to the figures for obesity, or what else, they all show a tendency. And this tendency is growth, growth, and growth. And also in all the debates about the economy, it should be growth, growth, and growth. But I've learned one thing in physics. If we have only growth patterns, or only decline patterns, we automatically end up in chaos. It is unavoidable. So what are characteristics of sustainable systems? That are systems that are continuously balancing between order and chaos, something between a highly frozen state and a highly chaotic state. And what are characteristics of those? That are balancing patterns, more or less sinusoidal patterns. And if you are a musician and you're playing in an orchestra, you know how important it is to have balancing patterns, because if somebody is not following it, the outcome is not the most appreciated one, and the concert halls will be very, very soon empty. So balancing patterns are the key to follow for sustainable food systems. So that is the first point. And that means that whatever indicator or whatever goal we are looking at, at least we have to look to it in a perspective of the overall food systems, multiple one. We have, of course, one global food system, a single one, but that is based on multiple food systems, and all of them should be sustainable. So whatever goal we look at, we need to look to the overall systems to see if they are behaving sustainable. Then how are systems described? Now, if you like playing games, if you like Monopoly, or if you like playing chess, or if you like dice or backgammon or whatever you like, you know that there are a few characteristics of a game. And those characteristics in the most simple way are the same as for systems. That is, a game is defined based on a playing field. There are rules, there are players, there are pieces, there are moves that you can make. There is the time dimension, which is often forgotten. Therefore, I don't believe in circles, even though I realize they are extremely important if you think about reutilizing nutrients and bring them back in time. But it's more spirals than circles, but that's a separate discussion. And so I had already 6, and there is 1/7, and that is the win or lose outcome. And I think all those 7 elements, they are related. Whatever we do, if we look to climate change, which is impacting somewhere in our food systems, whatever the behavior of actors is, whatever the rules are, they are all connected, and it should also be considered in this way. I think that Carina made a very important remark. Food is not only a commodity, but if you really state that it is also a right and a common good, what does it mean for our overall system? If it is a right, all steps that are taken in the system should lead that it becomes a right for all people around the globe. And then if you think about what is said about food sovereignty in a specific environment or local to local, are we then guaranteeing that we have globally available food for all if there's somewhere a misharvest or what else? It needs to be somewhere also connected. So local to local is fantastic if we try to be reconnected to agriculture, but it needs to be also discussed in local to global context, because it should be that we all have something to eat at our globe. So I think those considerations are important. Now, where to start for yourself as an individual? And I look to the time. This is maybe the most difficult one. If you are inspired by what happens in the protein discussion, do we need to go to alternative proteins or new balances between animal, vegetable proteins, maybe from algae, etc.? It is a fantastic domain to tackle. But then please don't tackle it only from a technological perspective, but also from an organizational or also a social perspective. My previous speakers already said to it. You should take into account what then the consumers prefer. You should take into account what it means for legislations, for our new food laws, or maybe even competition laws between players. Maybe we need to have many smaller players. Maybe there needs to be price negotiations, but that is forbidden today. So we need to reconsider our laws or legislations also in this context, which immediately makes all your questions more complicated. You are now confronted with many other experts. So the most important is to learn and work in teams. We should step away from our individual behaviors, which is not so easy because you're immediately confronted with what you don't know if you work with others. So you need to realize that you need to work with others where you can learn from, and you need to realize then what are your weaker points. You have always something to bring in, but the others as well, and how to make that to something that is going to work as a program with all the disciplines involved. That is not easy, which also means that you need to include out-of-the-box thinkers that are going to destabilize yourself. That is also not so easy. But you have something to bring in because you are a teacher, you have been grown up in a context, and that is what not the others will have. So there is where your specialties are going to be put in. But you are also confronted with uncertainty. And now this is linked to trust, and this is my final remark. If we are looking in food science. When I was trained and I was listening to Newton and the laws, we could really well describe what happens if you let drop a stone or something else, a leaf of a plant. We could nearly describe exactly what happens. But then we were confronted by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which says that whatever we discuss, we cannot precisely define in time and place what takes place. Now, if we look to systems where everything is connected, where it's becoming so non-linear, where even very minor changes can have enormous impacts, can we predict them? And the answer is no. So as scientists, the first thing that we have to do is become modest. We are not high-level experts anymore. We are all low-level experts in our small domains and confronted with our large uncertainties. So we have to be honest. We have to be honest also to the larger public. We know a few things, we can give evidence, but there are always uncertainties in what we present. And that is, I think, to become modest as a scientist is maybe the most important to do. I'm then really coming to the end. What can help you? What can help you is having coaches around that are going not to tell you what you all do wrong and right. I had a coach and was a retired vice president for research and innovation from Unilever. If he should spend all his time in telling what I did wrong, there was no time left to work anymore. But luckily he put a mirror in front of me and each time shows me alternatives. And that is really what helps me. So ask for coaches. And it could be others that are young, it could be others that have maybe some experiences gained in your life, and then form teams and use your inspiration and passion. And then I'm quite hopeful with all the wonderful examples I see, the bottom-up initiatives, often we can maybe reach more sustainable food systems in the future. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Professor Hugo. Thank you very much for this nice overview. Now, so regarding Sustainable Development Goals, in my opinion, also very important is the 17th Sustainable Development Goals. So it's partnership for the goals. And as you said, definitely we need to find an interdisciplinary approach and to try to find the opinion from diverse scientists, and definitely the inputs from industry, from society, from different kind of scientific disciplines, and also from the professionals to try to find the optimal way to reach sustainability in food systems. So I would definitely like to hear your opinion from Professor Carina, Professor Chibuike, and also Professor Hugo regarding young scientists and regarding young actors in any public or private organization. So how and in what way young scientists, young actors can are able to contribute to trustful solutions, redirecting our food systems towards more sustainable outcomes. And why is this redirection necessary? And also Professor Hugo mentioned to try to find the mentors. Definitely this is really important. And how can our young scientists, young actors, how can they interdisciplinary connect and try to redirect our food systems towards more sustainable outcomes? So please, Professor Carina, what is your opinion on this? How can young actors, young scientists, how can they really contribute?
Right, that's of course an enormous question, but I can try. Now, of course, we can all contribute based on where we are working and the disciplines we know. But I think we also can, and I think this relates to a question I got on this on the document with questions. I think we all also have to realize that different disciplines have different angles and can provide different answers. I think both in the material I was sent for today and also in some of the talks here today, I think science, often more natural science, emphasizes often more the citizen level, the individual, and says, we have to reach with trust, to the local or individual stakeholder, and we have to influence them. But But if you look at the opinion I presented, and even more so, it's a PR report based on scientists who I work with, it's in social science across and beyond Europe. They actually show that this is an overemphasis. You know, people don't always want to learn. Some want to learn, but they will find the information. They will look at certification labels, but many can't afford it. You know, and then you really have to think about how can we address the large retail frameworks, these type of issues. I actually sat and found something from the Sapir report that shows that retail, 70% of UK grocery purchasing is concentrated with 4 chains, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, and Morrison's. And this may be a bit extreme, but it's not super different from many other countries. And then we really have to think, how can we reach these? How can they act? How can we work with the big actors? It's not just the individuals, not just reaching the individual and the trust, but really changing the system. How can we address the industry? How can we get the knowledge in there? And I think everyone in their location can work on this and be aware of the many issues for sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carina. Now, please, Professor Chibuike, in your opinion, how can really young scientists can act in the way to redirect our food systems to become sustainable?
Well, thank you. That is a very complex question because, you know, like Hugo already mentioned, the food system is quite complex. And you know, not just complex in terms of the structure, but also in terms of cultural practices or experiences that are diverse, you know, to the extent that they change our perspective. So our perspectives are different in terms of how we see the food system. And because of that, the approach, and especially with respect to the contributions from young people, is also expected to vary. But from my perspective, what I would say is that the involvement of young people at different levels of the debate, of the discussion, is very important. And this can take the form of, you know, having people sit in panels as this, you know, to share their opinions, but also having people in careers related to the food systems, popularizing such careers as opposed to other careers that are more popular, like in the medical sector or in other sectors in IT. It could bring all these into the food system, and then trying to create or trying to tell people that these things are all interconnected. Well, nobody says you can be a physician and at the same time work on the food system, because there are a lot of connections between our food and our health. You can also be in ICT and work in the food system, because now increasingly we're trying to digitize the agri-food system. So we could find ways to connect all the disciplines for the young people to see that whatever their expertise, that they have a place within the food system to contribute, all right, and to build a career. Because the more the people that we have that could bring in their diverse expertise, the faster it is that we could get to destination, because all hands need to be on deck. Now, right now we have limited human resources, you know, compared to, you know, so other sectors, because we already identified that the food system is complex. That means that we need more than we have currently, you know, in terms of talent and skills. And coming from young people, I think that would make a very big impact in helping us get to the destination. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chibuike. Now to our Professor Hugo. So what is the future role for our young scientists and young actors towards making changes in food systems?
Yeah, if I'm going to answer that in a very spontaneous way, I think it's also maybe that we should blame ourselves as the older generation, between brackets. But John Bell of the European Commission, he is the director who has the fantastic title, Viable Planet or Healthy Planet. So who likes to have a title like this on his shoulder and do work then? But he is an important person, but he said, stop dreaming, act. And I think also, even though we are, as I said, small colibris, I think you can all do a lot together. But then the question is how to act, and Carina also said the how question is of extreme importance. The how is, and that is a little bit an advantage from food science. Chibuike said it is an applied science. I'm not 100% agreeing with that, because why, if you're dealing with very complex food matrices in changing conditions, why should that not also be a very fundamental science? But that's a separate question. The fact that this seen as an applied science is a big advantage, because it means that you are in contact with other players. And one of the things that has been said before, also by my colleague speakers, we should stop working in silos. So form alliances as young people with others in other domains, and then work on concrete examples where you are convinced of that they will bring something new. We have seen examples in Detroit where there was an enormous unemployment rate after, of course, the breakdown of the car industry, but new people, they started initiatives locally in gardens and whatever. Singapore even imagines to have 30% via vertical farming and new ways of producing of its own production. How is that possible in such a city state? I think your ideas there would definitely help. Agro parks are set up which are breaking barriers between production, transformation, transport, maybe have participatory involvement of citizens, form clusters, work together on those, and then try to build your own more sustainable outcomes. I think that is what is, if you're going to communicate it, I'm convinced that many people will follow you. They will listen, and you will make mistakes. There's no doubt, but nothing is better than to make mistakes, because you can do it better next time. So it's really form those clusters and go. Your examples will show us how to proceed. Not only participate in discussion events, maybe better act. And I'm sorry that I'm now speaking, because I'm now in this discussion event. So I give the exactly wrong example, but I hope you can do better.
Okay, thank you, Professor Hugo. So now we are going to start with our questions from the audience. So we have the first question. So as we see work happening globally on the alleviating hunger and hidden hunger, there is a lot of focus on fortification of foods. Do you see a paradox in encouraging artificial food fortification and at the same time encouraging regenerative farming as a means to meet both food and nutritional security? So please choose who wants to answer. So regarding hunger, hidden hunger, fortification of foods, regenerative farming.
Maybe I will start, especially with respect to fortification. So food fortification is especially biofortification, or sometimes physical fortification by just combining different foods in order to achieve a desired nutritional composition is actually a very good way of mitigating some of the issues related to nutrient deficiencies. Because the issues about achieving a sustainable food system, if you look at the zero hunger goal, especially the target 2.2, it's specifically focused on mitigating undernutrition, especially in children under 5, and also in women of childbearing age. So if you look at that, and especially in some parts of the world where there are limited access to food that could actually make a complete set of nutritional requirements of the susceptible population, then you see that there is a need to utilize different approaches, and biofortification or other types of fortification would definitely be considered as one of those approaches that could help address those critical needs in those critical populations. Of course, it might not be relevant in every population, because some populations, people would have more access to nutritious foods than others. But it's just a way to show one example of how to meet a need of one particular population that might be different from the need of a different population. So this would be my perspective with respect to biofortification. And like I also said earlier, it doesn't necessarily have to be biofortification. It could also be just identifying all the different components of food or types of food that you could bring together in a diet in order to achieve particular, maybe complete nutritional profile. And so that can be done at the household level by just mixing different types of food and then hopefully helping achieve that nutritional goal.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Chibuike, for such a wonderful, a comment, and thank you, Professor Hugo, for creating such a nice discourse in this today's discussion. I am from a country like India, and in India we are number one in many food productions, like be it cereals or milk. But due to rapid urbanizations and also migrations, people are migrating from rural to urban areas, and there is a leading to change in profession. I come from a farmer's family, but now there is a huge change I see in the village, change in profession. So people are moving from villages and leaving the farming and going to different professions. More and more people are opting for industrial or other related jobs and giving up farming completely. So these more and more farmlands are being converted to cities. So what do you think, how can we tackle such kind of problem with growing demand for food, as well as the balancing this with the declining interest of people to engage in the agriculture? What would be your advice? Yeah, Professor, anyone can address this.
I can try, although it's of course almost impossible. Yeah, thank you. Just to say, we touched a bit on this in the opinion, with it's not only climate that is changing, for instance, it's a number of areas changing. You have to look at them all together. And of course, in these issues, it's a lot about both policy change maybe, but also rethinking what is a city and where do we get food. So we are, at least in Sweden, for instance, we're discussing that maybe you shouldn't be allowed to build on some farmland. And then one has to rethink where should people go? Can people work from home? Are there other ways of working in specific jobs? But one can also rethink the city. Maybe some of the food should be grown in the city, on roofs or walls, or so that the city shouldn't be separated from food production, or in water reservoirs or tanks in the city, or for instance, this previous opinion on food from the oceans, we discussed a lot that maybe we also have to have better marine spatial planning, because now we don't really think about what are the concurrent opportunities when you build in the ocean. If you have, for instance, old oil rigs which are not polluted, maybe that's a structure on which you can grow algae. And people who worked in the food from the oceans opinion, they noted a lot that agricultural systems you have to feed. You have to go there with manure or whatever you use for artificial feeding, but in the ocean the food just runs past. So it's actually very efficient to grow algae or mussels, and that's a very efficient protein from mussels, for instance. You have to rethink planning. What do you allow? Rethink what is a city, rethink from where do we get what and by what structures, and is the planning and policy basis there for it. And then of course farming has to pay as well. Maybe we have to pay more for food. Many of us buy food we actually don't need. Maybe that should be more expensive. Maybe we have to work with the retail chains in these type of issues. So it's a huge question and a huge answer. And this is just some comments or additions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Hugo. Yeah, we'll be happy to have your comments.
Yeah, I think Carina gave already a fantastic answer to your also highly challenging question. I think there is, maybe it's an image question. Of course, I'm not speaking for the people who has hunger, because there is one ambition that that whatever we produce, it should be shared and accessible for all. That is the base. But there is also, if I take it from a little bit of distance, food is a fascinating domain overall. It is already mentioned, we have food cultures. We have already for many years. All people who has been in a kitchen and preparing food is a food engineer, and is confronted with the wonderful tastes, with the diversity in it, with etc. We have a tendency of decoupling what we do in the field in what we consume. And to bring this back and all the steps in between in something where you can be involved in. For example, we set up, when I was still working in the Netherlands, the Restaurant of the Future. And we were working with children, young children, in the restaurant, where they were jointly cooking and jointly preparing and jointly confronted with what they were doing. And there, I know there are many, many other examples in the world who are doing that in school canteens, etc. But then be confronted with whatever you do with the food. That you even can enrich flavors, that you can also do that in a fascinating ways with others where you are sharing your ingredients, etc. That are opportunities that we may better use, but then don't decouple the production from what takes place somewhere else and maybe where some other people are earning all the money with. No, it's the agro parks in India, what I've learned in the past, and I'm not a real expert in it, but I was in the beginning with the Yes Bank and with some of those concepts. Fantastic. It was based on the creativity of the local people with their own ideas, not only about production, but also how to create value locally, how to do it and in transport, how to connect the local citizen. I think those examples exist, and maybe we should put them more in the spotlight, that they are going to serve as the examples of the future, and thus also deconnecting, let's say, all the parts which are now seen as parts of supply chains and then with power asymmetries, etc. No, we should go to power symmetries, but then in systems. I think that is the way forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Hugo. Professor Mohammed Hassan is here raising his hand. We are so thankful to Professor Mohammed for joining us today in this discussion, and we would be happy to have your comment. Professor Mohammed Hassan.
Hello.
Yes,
hello.
sir.
Sorry, I just couldn't resist commenting on the beautiful remarks mentioned by Chibuike and also emphasized by the last speaker. I think Shalini. And I think the problems in India are quite similar to the problems in Africa. When it comes to engaging the youth, and in this case, of course, the case we have more focused young scientists in the profession of farming and agriculture and food systems. This is, of course, I understand it's a universal problem, but we have a very serious problem in Africa. The young people, the youth, do not like to enter the career of farming. And this is simply because what Chibuike mentioned earlier, it relates to education, to the popularization, and so on. But it also relates to the opportunities. I mean, we all know that young scientists love to work on areas related to frontier technologies, digitalization, areas that relate to information and communication technologies. Unfortunately, these areas are now recognized worldwide as transformative areas for food systems. Food system cannot be transformed at the moment without the full utilization of the frontier technologies. So I think the issue is, how can we make this awareness that is very badly needed in the developing countries about how to utilize the digitization technologies, the technologies that are related to genetic engineering, genes and gene transformation of the plants, how to get this message through and get some of these young scientists trained in these new areas of technology with an eye of their application to agriculture, to farming, to food systems in general. So it's an issue that is quite challenging, but I think it can be done. I think we can really emphasize through our universities, through our education system, those technologies that can really transform agriculture and make them readily, make the knowledge readily available to the youth. I am absolutely sure that in a very short time, we'll get a large number of young scientists and the youth entering the area of farming, the area of agriculture as a career choice. And this is really what we need now. So I just want to emphasize or re-emphasize the issues that were raised by some of you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed. And I know that there are a lot of challenges involved in going for youngsters in the farming, because it's like a myth that, you know, people will laugh at you when you do the farming. There is a lot of hard work involved in it. There is no money, there are no incentives, and there are a lot of hurdles and challenges. So maybe, you know, government need to popularize a career in agriculture or farming and give more, you know, incentives and popularize it. So maybe, you know, it's a lot of challenge. We need to, you know, tackle it. So now I request Professor Anet to take the next question.
Thank you very much for a nice conversation and discussions. Now I'm going back to our question part. So we have a question regarding knowledge in the food systems. So is there any effort, and how can these efforts build in the knowledge of food systems into structural scalability academic across the various sectors of education? So do we have any examples from across the world to learn from? And I will combine this with the topic on bringing up the topic of local and indigenous knowledge to strengthen food systems. How can policies be made more open to upscale local knowledge? This is a good question. I would ask our panelists, maybe Carina, Professor Carina.
Thank you, I'll try. On the first one, I'll just note that, of course, there is a need to build in knowledge of food systems, maybe in education. On the other hand, I also just emphasize that, you know, even if a lot of our focus historically has been on, you know, the citizens have to learn and transform and change and make other choices, this is not really likely. You know, these voluntary measures that depend on people learning individually, that's not likely to drive things if you have, you know, the fact that, you know, 70% of retail is owned by 4 actors in the UK, you know, these type examples. Then the big actors have to change. That has to be a large focus. So yes, of course, it's important to work on all fronts, including knowledge building, education, these type of issues. And it's actually the same for a previous question. Is there a paradox in encouraging different methods or foci? It's not really that either, because so much has to be done and different things will work in different areas, maybe. And this also then leads to your final questions. How can national policy be aligned to make sure everyone has access to food which is nutritious and support traditional food systems? This is actually one of the areas that the Zagreb report discussed quite a lot and discussed the issue of upscaling. And they also noted that, as I tried to say in the presentation, you know, some examples will work in some circumstances because people are used to working in a different way, or there are, you know, actors that support it and will fund it or govern it, or all of these different things. So of course, this is also a very important part, and it probably depends on in what nation you are, how national policies can be worked. But I think many recognize that, you know, it's not a one-fit-all solution, and some things that work in one country region won't work in another one. Like this comment, you know, protein from the oceans is maybe not the thing in India, but it can be the thing in many other countries and regions, you know. So just thinking, where do we get things from and how can we work in specific context? I will actually put the link to the Zagreb report in the chat, and there they have a specific section with, I think, 10 examples that work very different in different countries. Of course, these are only European because that was a European report, but still I can sort of illustrate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Carina. Shalini, please, can you continue with the questions?
Thank you so much, Professor Carina, for such a wonderful, discussion. I have another question, especially, addressed to you, Professor Carina. And thank you so much for a very interesting input given by you through your talk. And in your time advising the EU Commission on food system, but beyond, did you see any difference between advice based on the natural sciences and the social sciences in how they were received?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question. Yes, I did. And I think some is actually a resultant of, the EU has been very forward-looking. They built this body which is intended to cover different areas of science, including humanities and social science. Science advice in the world has maybe not been as forward-looking, or thinking about not just the what but the how question. So sometimes when we actually worked with social science, then politicians did not always understand. If we wrote about research on attitudes, say so and so people are willing to, then they said, oh, but this is attitudes, and we said, no, it's research about attitudes. So they had to understand that research areas were different. And it's still research. We speak about attitudes does not mean it's an attitude. We speak about research on attitudes, people's attitudes towards doing things or not doing things. And this is actually a huge part in, for instance, transforming food systems, understanding what people in different regions and areas can expect or will do, or how to package something for them to buy it or use it, So lots of these things. So these things came up. On the other hand, people were very positive in general, and we actually have gotten very good response. Food from the Oceans was both natural and social science, and broader, but both those areas. The Sustainable Foods report was a social science report. To add to that, we had more on the what issue already answered in existing scientific advice, which was more natural science based. And we've also had numerous other reports which are very broad and build on a broad range of knowledge. We're working on one on energy right now, which obviously also can't be, smaller than the full scope of disciplines. And sometimes, in science, we haven't learned this, but we do know it in practice, and in many sciences, and the EU knows it, that you have to have a broad scope. And we've gotten very positive responses to actually all of these, because they address the how issue. And politicians are, of course, enormously interested in the how issue. And going beyond, the focus on the individual and understanding, how can they work with communities and regions, local and regional level, and understand this variation, because often they know examples. They don't know the research about it or the research about attitudes and so on. So I hope that's a sort of answer. I'll try to go back and look at the question, but yes, I can speak about this for a long time. So thank you so much for the question.
Thank you so much. And this question was from our production officer, Biyata. Thank you so much for addressing it. Yeah, now I request Professor Anet to take the next question.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are going to the end of our great panel discussion and panel session on transforming food systems. And now just one question from the audience. It is addressed to we are seeing higher and higher rates of on non-communicable diseases due to poor and overnutrition, especially among communities where there is increasing urbanization and people are opting for processed foods as we address sustainable food systems. So this is one question. So please, if somebody from our panel would like to answer.
Sorry, Anet, could you repeat that question? It wasn't very clear.
Okay, so how do we explore the declining health of people? Yeah. So we have different kind of diseases due to poor and overnutrition, especially among communities. Yeah. And so we are discussing about sustainability and sustainable food systems, and we have really great problems with under and overnutrition people.
Okay, maybe I would comment on that. I think there was a mention of food processing as a contributing factor, but I would like to dispel this notion that food processing, processed food is bad at first, because food processing, like Hugo mentioned earlier, is done at many levels, not just at the industry level. What we do in the kitchen is food processing. We're all food scientists and food engineers. So the issue with nutrition, diet-related health issues like obesity and type 2 diabetes is not necessarily because of food processing. Because without processing, we will not be able to consume the food or derive the beneficial nutrients which are part of that food. The issue is about food that is not dense in nutrients that the population needs, not necessarily the process of transforming the food. And I agree that that is increasing the incidences of obesity and type 2 diabetes and other health-related issues like cardiovascular disease. And then also that brings to question some of the things that we've already been talking about connecting the different goals of sustainable development, SDGs, like the health and well-being and the zero hunger, so that our approach and our efforts wouldn't just be about increasing the yield and delivering food to people, but also making sure that we deliver the highest quality food to people that would reduce some of these incidences, especially with urbanization. You see the existence of a double burden of malnutrition, where people from the same community would have undernutrition, deficiency, and overnutrition within the same community, especially as people are becoming a little wealthier and they could afford some of the processed food, then that becomes a burden. So if we find a way to integrate some of the ideas that we discussed here, especially ideas related to increasing our food diversity, opting for more indigenous options or local options, or things that we would not normally purchase. And of course, someone would always say that this is challenging, especially as people are becoming busier. And people would maybe just think about picking up food from the restaurant or the grocery store without necessarily thinking about cooking. So it brings back the whole concept of transforming food ourselves and trying to cook ourselves, prepare food ourselves in order to be able to have a better control of the nutritional components of the food, and then hopefully help mitigate some of these challenges that you have with respect to especially high sugar diets, and their contribution to obesity and diabetes. Thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Professor Hugo would like to add his comment.
Yes, I'm extremely happy with the response of Chibuike, because there is a real miscommunication here where they say ultra transformed food is bad. But I fully agree that the processing of food, first of all, is safety. Why is it done? It's for safety, but also for digestibility and so on and so on. So it is more the composition of food that is where it's going wrong. And then I also fully agree with him. If we are not disconnecting the consumers from the food system itself, so if they are left alone, we cannot blame them. They make their choices, and people are living in their environments, and they are also influenced by the others, etc. But if we are reconnecting them with the food system, we have a chance, and there are luckily very good examples of it, that the patterns may change in a direction that is more healthy as well as more sustainable. And then also I come back to the question about indigenous food. And the remark made by Carina, we had a big problem in finding examples, because those examples were only possible to extract from the English literature. But a lot of communication is in the local languages, or even not even explicit, but implicit languages, and how to make this available, because that is so rich, as Chibuike also said, that I think we should focus on that we say there is so much there. Nature has so much to offer in the different context, how to make that better visible, how to communicate that in a way that we all can learn from it. I think there is a key topic. It is not, I think if you look to the English literature, we are tapping on only a few examples, often from the Anglo-Saxon world. It's not completely true, because a lot of others communicate also in literature in English, but not in food. It is not all people. When I was trained in physics, all people were communicating in English, but in food not. And I think there we are lacking really an enormous source of information that we may tap, which inspires us for sure for alternatives. And that also inspires us in food science and technology for new.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. We are actually a little running out of time. One quick last question, which is very important, because you in your talk mentioned about, having that local to global approach. And on the same thing, I would like to ask, like, I work on a traditional food and that area, which is very, very traditional. I myself have faced a lot of challenges and hurdles when, trying to publish. The top journals editors says that, this information is very local, better you publish it in a local journal. So I have a similar kind of question, that the topic of local and indigenous knowledge to strengthen the food system, it's very, very important. How can policies be made maybe at nationally or internationally more open to upscale this local knowledge? What do you suggest? And this can be addressed by anyone. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, I don't know about policies in general that can be addressed, but one specific example you mentioned is about communicating research and the fact that not every journal accepts work that is of local relevance. And I believe that that is wrong in all fronts. Because, gone are the days where we're trying to look at one solution that benefits the entire world. Research can be localized, but then what should be the focus is that the knowledge derived from the research should be beneficial to all. Not necessarily about the plant materials or the food resource or the type of processing you used. Those things should not be the deciding factor in selecting papers for publication. I think it should all be included because this is how we diversify the knowledge, and this is actually how we derive the benefits of the talents we have in society, because everybody is looking at things from different perspectives. And without such diversity, it's difficult to actually reach the goal, the targets that we have set. So I believe from that point of view that there has to be a change, and there needs to be a change in including everybody and every researcher and their creative solutions to this problem. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chibuike. Professor Hugo.
Yeah, it's a highly interesting question. I think that sometimes we have a tendency to think that we should regulate everything top down. And that is, in this case, I think, not at all the best solution. Give the freedom to all the local communities and allow in the regulations and legislations that they have also this freedom to think what they think is best. It is, of course, fantastic if their best cases and practices in their context could be translated in a language that is understandable by all, because then we can learn something from it somewhere else. And maybe we cannot copy it, but maybe there are elements in it what can be used. So that is the fantastic part. There are, of course, also issues if we look to safety or etc. There we have to be very careful and things that may be really regulated top down, or at least that there are no disasters taking place if we are going to transport. But I'm very much in favor of give the freedom for local operations. That is the policies. If the policies can strive for that, that's fantastic.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Hugo. Despite of all the hurdles and challenges, scientists like me are working towards traditional food products, and nobody can stop our motivation and inspiration. So it has been such a wonderful session, because why it should not be, because food is such an important entity. It's so interesting, but the time is not permitting us, and we have a few other more sessions. And I now request Professor Anet to provide concluding remarks and wrap up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shalini. Thank you very much to our panelists, to Professor Hugo, to Professor Chibuike, and to Professor Carina for a great discussion and a great overview on how to transform food systems to reach sustainable development goals. And now the last your opinion on, and to wrap up, regarding trust. So our Global Young Academy meeting is regarding trust in science So I would like to ask like a short question and short answer from you to wrap and to finish our great session. So trust in science by all stakeholders. So do they trust science? In example, producers, consumers, and people that are not in science. So do they trust us?
Well, maybe I can go first. I believe the answer is yes and no. So it depends on the topic. It depends on whether it benefits them or favors them or whether they understand the concept, because there's no one size fits all scenario. But I also believe that if the answer is no, if the answer is yes, that's good. But if the answer is no, that this can be enhanced. And in fact, most of the things we discussed today is about enhancing that trust, especially the engagement part. If we want people to trust what we're doing as scientists, then we have to engage them more and make them a part, an integral part of not just adopting the solution, but also in seeking the solution. So they have to be an integral part of that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Professor Hugo?
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer. But I have the feeling that there is a tendency that the trust is going down. And also it is partly because of some trajectories in science itself. If you're now putting so much attention on, we should have RRI, responsible research and innovation. Does that mean that we were irresponsible before? That's nearly evoking the thought. It is not exactly meant like this, but it is in the communication that people are, oh, you were irresponsible and now you want to be responsible. I think this is a communication issue. So yes, I believe that there is a lot of trust in science, and luckily there is a lot of trust, and there is also a reason for it, because there are a lot of data that are shared and based on which evidence is made. So I'm very, very positive about that. As long as we remain there very transparent what we do and how we did it, even if we make wrong conclusions, but if we remain transparent and honest, I think the trust will remain. And where it's not, as Chibuike said, there we need to do an extra action. I think also in food science and technology, we were sometimes confronted with remarks. Maybe we didn't explain it well. So maybe we have to redo it and take into consideration and also ask, why was it understood in this way, and take this message back and reformulate what we found, or what we based on that, what options we draw, and so on.
Thank you very much, Professor Hugo. And Professor Carina?
Yes, thank you. And I have to agree with the previous speakers, it depends. But I think the most important part is that we have systems where science, and with that I mean the broad range of science, from social science and humanities to natural science technologies, everything there is really taken into account systematically. So that we don't have systems where, you don't listen to science, or you don't have scientific advice, or you make policies without considering this. So I think as long as the systems are actually built to take into account science, then I think we are fine, because then it will trickle down and it will support, the art of the possible politics to at least act on best available knowledge. So I think I must say that is, to my mind, the crucial part. And then you can't control everything, and there will be variations. As Chibuike said, it depends, and that will be the case. But as long as the systems work in this way, I think we are on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists and to all of our participants. Thank you, Dr. Shalini. Thank you, Global Young Academy, for leading and organizing this session. And please have a nice day. And we are going to finalize this session. And I would like to invite you to go to Wonder for informal networking. And thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. And I encourage everyone to go and network with one of the best members of Global Young Academy on Wonder. It's fantastic. Don't wonder what is Wonder is. So just explore and take the experience. Bye-bye, everyone. Stay safe and take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.